Chapter 5 of the Last Journals of David Livingstone in Central Africa from 1865 to his death, Volume 1 of 2, 1866 through 1868, by David Livingstone and Horace Waller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Crosses Cape Maclear, the Havildar demoralized, the discomfited chief. Beaches Marenga's town, the earth sponge. Description of Marenga's town. Rumors of Mazitu. Musa and the Johanna men desert. Beaches Kimsusas. His delight at seeing the doctor once more. The fat ram. Kimsusa relates his experience of Livingstone's advice. Chuma finds relatives. Kimsusa solves the transport difficulty nobly. Another old fishing acquaintance. Description of the people and country on the west of the lake. The Kanthudas. Kauma. Iron smelting. An African Sir Colin Campbell. Milandos. 21st September, 1866. We marched westwards, making across the base of Cape Maclear. 2 men employed as guides and carriers went along, grumbling that their dignity was so outraged by working only fancy Wayu carrying like slaves. They went but a short distance and took advantage of my being in front to lay down the loads, one of which consisted of the Havildr's bed and cooking things. Here they opened the other bundle and paid themselves, the gallant Havildar sitting and looking on. He has never been of the smallest use, and lately has pretended to mysterious pains in his feet. No swelling or other symptom accompanied this complaint. On coming to Pima's village, he ate a whole fowl and some fish for supper, slept soundly till daybreak, then on awaking commenced a furious groaning. Feet were so bad. I told him that people usually moaned when insensible, but he had kept quiet till he awaked. He sulked at this and remained all day, though I sent a man to carry his kit for him, and when he came up he had changed the seat of his complaint from his feet to any part of his abdomen. He gave off his gun belt and pouch to the carrier. This was a blind to me, for I examined and found that he had already been stealing and selling his ammunition. This is all preparatory to returning to the coast with some slave trader. Nothing can exceed the ease and grace with which sepoys can glide from a swagger into the most abject begging of food from the villagers. He has remained behind. 22nd September, 1866. The hills we crossed were about 700 feet above Nyassa, generally covered with trees. No people were seen. We slept by the brook Sekochi. Rocks of hardened sandstone rested on mica schist, which had an efflorescence of alum on it. Above this was dolomite. The hills often capped with it and oak spar, giving a snowy appearance. We had a Wayu party with us. 6 handsomely attired women carried huge pots of beer for their husbands, who very liberally invited us to partake. After 7 hours hard traveling, we came to the village where we spend Sunday by the torrent Usingazi and a near remarkable mountain, Namasi. The chief, a one-eyed man, was rather coy, coming incognito to visit us, and as I suspected that he was present, I asked if the chief were an old woman, afraid to look at and welcome a stranger. All burst into a laugh and looked at him, when he felt forced to join in it, and asked what sort of food we liked best. Chuma put this clear enough by saying he eats everything eaten by the Wayao. This tribe, or rather the Machinga, now supersede the Manganga. We passed one village of the latter near this, a sad, tumble-down affair, while the Wayu villages are very neat, with handsome straw or reed fences all around their huts. 24th September, 1866. We went only 2½ miles to the village of Marenga, a very large one, situated at the eastern edge of the bottom of the heel of the lake. The chief is ill of a loathsome disease derived direct from the Arabs. Raised patches of scab of circular form disfigure the face and neck as well as other parts. His brother begged me to see him and administer some remedy for the same complaint. He is at a village a little way off, and though sent for, was too ill to come or to be carried. The tribe is of Babisa origin. Many of these people had gone to the coast as traders, and returning with arms and ammunition, joined the Wayu in their forays on the Manganja, and eventually set themselves up as an independent tribe. The women do not wear the lip ring, though the majority of them are Wayu. They cultivate largely and have plenty to eat. They have cattle, but do not milk them. The bogs, or earthen sponges, of this country occupy a most important part in its physical geography, and probably explain the annual inundations of most of the rivers. Wherever a plain sloping towards a narrow opening in hills or higher ground exists, there we have the conditions requisite for the formation of an African sponge. The vegetation, not being of a healthy or peat-forming kind, falls down, rots, and then forms rich black loam. In many cases, a mass of this loam, 2 or 3 feet thick, rests on a bed of pure river sand, which is revealed by crabs and other aquatic animals bringing it to the surface. At present, in the dry season, the black loam is cracked in all directions, and the cracks are often as much as 3 inches wide and very deep. The whole surface has now fallen down and rests on the sand, but when the rains come, the first supply is nearly all absorbed in the sand. The black loam forms soft slush and floats on the sand. The narrow opening prevents it from moving off in a landslip, but an oozing spring rises at that spot. All the pools in the lower portion of this spring course are filled by the first rains, which happened south of the equator when the sun goes vertically over any spot. The second or greater rains happen in his course north again, when all the bogs and river courses being wet, the supply runs off and forms the inundation. This was certainly the case as observed on the Zambezi and Shiré, and taking the different times for the sun's passage north of the equator, it explains the inundation of the Nile. 25th September, 1866. Marenga's town on the west shore of Lake Nyassa is very large, and his people collected in great numbers to gaze at the stranger. The chief's brother asked a few questions, and I took the occasion to be a good one for telling him something about the Bible and the future state. The men said that their fathers had never told them aught about the soul, but they thought that the whole man rotted and came to nothing. What I said was very nicely put by a volunteer spokesman who seemed to have a gift that way, for all listened most attentively, and especially when told that our Father in heaven loved all, and heard prayers addressed to him. Marenga came dressed in a red-figured silk shawl, attended by about 10 court beauties, who spread a mat for him, then a cloth above, and sat down as if to support him. He asked me to examine his case inside a hut. He exhibited his loathsome skin disease, and being blacker than his wives, the blotches with which he was covered made him appear very ugly. He thought that the disease was in the country before Arabs came. Another new disease acquired from them was the smallpox. 26th September, 1866. An Arab passed us yesterday, his slaves going by another route across the base of Cape Maclear. He told Musa that all the country in front was full of Mazitu, that 44 Arabs and their followers had been killed by them at Kasungu, and he only escaped. Musa and all the Johanna men now declared that they would go no further. Musa said, "No good country that. I want to go back to Johanna to see my father and mother and son." I took him to Marenga and asked the chief about the Mazitu. He explained that the disturbance was caused by the Manganja finding that Jumbe brought Arabs and ammunition into the country every year, and they resented it in consequence. They would not allow more to come because they were the sufferers and their nation was getting destroyed. I explained to Musa that we should avoid the Mazitu. Marenga added, "There are no Mazitu near where you are going." But Musa's eyes stood out with terror, and he said, "I can believe that man." But I inquired, "How can you believe the Arab so easily?" Musa answered, "I asked him to tell me, and he say true, true," etc. When we started, all the Johanna men walked off, leaving the goods on the ground. They have been such inveterate thieves that I am not sorry to get rid of them, for though my party is now inconveniently small, I could not trust them with flints in their guns, nor allow them to remain behind, for their object was invariably to plunder their loads. Here then we have Livingstone's account of the origin of that well-told story, which at first seemed too true. How Mr. Edward Young, R.N., declared it to be false and subsequently proved it untrue is already well known. This officer's quick voyage to Lake Nyassa reflected the greatest credit on him, and all hearts were filled with joy when he returned and reported the tale of Livingstone's murder to be merely an invention of Musa and his comrades. I ought to mention that the stealing by the Johanna men was not the effect of hunger. It attained its height when we had plenty. If one remained behind, we knew his object in delaying was stealing. He gave what he filched to the others, and Musa shared the dainties they bought with the stolen property. When spoken to, he would say, "I every day tell Johanna man no steal doctor's things." As he came away and left them in the march, I insisted out his bringing up all his men. This he did not relish, and the amount stolen was not small. One stole 15 pounds of fine powder, another 7, another left 6 tablecloths out of about 24, another called out a man to bring a fish, and he would buy it with beads, the beads being stolen, and Musa knew it all and connived at it, but it was terror that drove him away at last. With our goods and canoes, we went round the bottom of the heel of Nyassa, slept among reeds, and the next morning, 27th, landed at Masangwa, which is nearly opposite Kimsusas, or Katosas, as the Makololo called him. A man had been taken off by a crocodile last night. He had been drinking beer and went down to the water to cool himself, where he lay down, and the brute seized him. The water was very muddy, being stirred up by an east wind, which lashed the waves into our canoes and wetted our things. The loud wail of the women is very painful to hear. It sounds so dolefully. 28th September 1866. We reached Kinsusa's below Mount Mulindini of Kirk's Range. The chief was absent, but he was sent for immediately. His town is much increased since I saw it last. 29th September 1866. Another Arab passed last night with the tale that his slaves had all been taken from him by the Mazitu. It is more respectable to be robbed by them than by the Manganja, who are very much despised and counted nobodies. I propose to go west of this among the Moravi until quite away beyond the disturbances, whether of Mazitu or Manganja. 30th September 1866. We enjoy our Sunday here. We have abundance of food from Kimsusa's wife. The chief wished me to go alone and enjoy his drinking bout, and then we could return to this place together, but this was not to my taste. 1st October 1866. Kimsusa, or Mahusa, came this morning and seemed very glad again to see his old friend. He sent off at once to bring an enormous ram, which had either killed or seriously injured a man. The animal came tied to a pole to keep him off the man who held it, while a lot more carried him. He was prodigiously fat. This is a true African way of showing love, plenty of fat and beer. Accordingly, the chief brought a huge basket of pombe, the native beer, and another of nasima, or porridge, and a pot of cooked meat. To these were added a large basket of maize. So much food had been brought to us that we had at last to explain that we could not carry it. The doctor states a fact in the next few lines which shows that the Africans readily profit by advice which appeals to their common sense, and we make this observation in full knowledge of similar instances. Kimsusa says that they felt earthquakes at the place Mapanda now occupies, but none where he is now. He confirms the tradition that the Manganja came from the west or west-northwest. He speaks more rationally about the deity than some have done, and adds that it was by following the advice which I gave him the last time I saw him, and not selling his people, that his village is now 3 times its former size. He has another village besides, and he was desirous that I should see that too. That was the reason he invited me to come, but the people would come and visit me. 2nd October, 1866. Kimsusa made his appearance early with a huge basket of beer, 18 inches high and 15 inches in diameter. He served it out for a time, taking deep draughts himself, becoming extremely loquacious in consequence. He took us to a dense thicket behind his town, among numbers of lofty trees, many of which I have seen nowhere else. That under which we sat bears a fruit in clusters, which is eatable and called mbedwa. A space had been cleared, and we were taken to this shady spot as the one in which business of importance and secrecy is transacted. Another enormous basket of beer was brought here by his wives, but there was little need for it, for Kimsusa talked incessantly, and no business was done. 3rd October, 1866. The chief came early and sober. I rallied him on his previous loquacity, and said one ought to find time in the morning if business was to be done. He took it in good part, and one of his wives joined in bantering him. She is the wife, and the mother of the sons in whom he delights, and who will succeed him. I proposed to him to send men with me to the Babisa country, and I would pay them there, where they could buy ivory for him with the pay, and bringing it back, he would be able to purchase clothing without selling his people. He says that his people would not bring the pay or anything else back. When he sends to purchase ivory, he gives the price to Arabs or Babisa, and they buy for him and conduct his business honestly. But his people, the Manganja, cannot be trusted. This shows a remarkable state of distrust, and from previous information, it is probably true. A party of the Arab Kamburi's people went up lately to the Moravi country above this, and immediately west of Kirk's Range, to purchase slaves. But they were attacked by the Moravi and dispersed with slaughter. This makes Kimsusa's people afraid to venture there. They had some quarrel with the Moravi also of their own, and no intercourse now took place. A path further south was followed by Mapanda lately, and great damage done, so it would not be wise to go on his footsteps. Kimsusa said he would give me carriers to go up to the Moravi, but he wished to be prepaid. To this I agreed, but even then he could not prevail on anyone to go. He then sent for an old Mobisa man, who has a village under him, and acknowledges Kimsusa's power. He says that he fears that, should he force his Manganja to go, they would leave us on the road, or run away on the first appearance of danger. But this Mobisa man would be going to his own country, and would stick by us. Meanwhile, the chief overstocks us with beer and other food. 4th October, 1866. The Mobisa man sent for came, but was so ignorant of his own country, not knowing the names of the chief Babisa town or any of the rivers, that I declined his guidance. He would have only been a clog on us, and anything about the places in front of us we could ascertain at the villages where we touch by inquiry as well as he could. A woman turned up here and persuaded Chuma that she was his aunt. He wanted to give her at once a fathom of calico and beads, and wished me to cut his pay down for the purpose. I persuaded him to be content with a few beads for her. He gave her his spoon and some other valuables, fully persuaded that she was a relative, though he was interrogated first as to his father's name and tribe, etc., before she declared herself. It shows a most forgiving disposition on the part of these boys to make presents to those who, if genuine relations, actually sold them. But those who have been caught young know nothing of the evils of slavery, and do not believe in its ills. Chuma, for instance, believes now that he was caught and sold by the Manganja, and not by his own Wayu, though it was just in the opposite way that he became a slave, and he asserted and believes that no Wayu ever sold his own child. When reminded that Wikitani was sold by his own father, he denied it. Then that the father of Chimwala, another boy, sold him, his mother, and sister, he replied, "These are Machinga." This is another tribe of Wayu, but this showed that he was determined to justify his countrymen at any rate. I mention this matter because though the Oxford and Cambridge mission have an advantage in the instruction of boys taken quite young from slavers, yet these same boys forget the evils to which they were exposed and from which they were rescued, and it is even likely that they will, like Chuma, deny that any benefit was conferred upon them by their deliverance. This was not stated broadly by Chuma, but his tone led one to believe that he was quite ready to return to the former state. 5th October, 1866. The chief came early with an immense basket of beer, as usual. We were ready to start. He did not relish this, but I told him it was clear that his people set very light by his authority. He declared that he would force them, or go himself, with his wives as carriers. This dawdling and guzzling had a bad effect on my remaining people. Simon, a Nasic lad, for instance, overheard 2 words which he understood. These were Mazitsu and Ipululu, or desert. And from these he conjured up a picture of Mazitsu rushing out upon us from the jungle and killing all without giving us time to say a word. To this he added scraps of distorted information. Kamburi was a very bad chief in front, etc., all showing egregious cowardice. Yet he came to me for advice. On asking what he knew, as he could not speak the language, he replied that he had heard the above 2 words, and that Chuma could not translate them, but he had caught them and came to warn me. The chief asked me to stay over today, and he would go with his wives tomorrow. I was his friend, and he would not see me in difficulties without doing his utmost. He says that there is no danger of our not finding people for carrying loads. It is probable that Kamburi's people went as marauders and were beaten off in consequence. 6th October, 1866. We marched about 7 miles to the north to the village opposite the pass to Piri and on a rivulet, Godidza. It was very hot. Kimsusa behaves like a king. His strapping wives come to carry loads and shame his people. Many of the young men turned out and took the loads, but it was evident that they feared retaliation if they ventured up the pass. One wife carried beer, another meal, and as soon as we arrived, cooking commenced. Porridge and roasted goat's flesh made a decent meal. A preparation of a meal called toku is very refreshing and brings out all the sugary matter in the grain. He gave me some in the way, and, seeing I liked it, a calabash full was prepared for me in the evening. Kimsusa delights in showing me to his people as his friend. If I could have used his pombe or beer, it would have put some fat on my bones, but it requires a strong digestion. Many of the chiefs and their wives live on it almost entirely. A little flesh is necessary to relieve the acidity it causes, and they keep all flesh very carefully, no matter how high it may become. Drying it on a stage over a fire prevents entire putridity. 7th October, 1866. I heard whooping cough in the village. We found our visitors so disagreeable that I was glad to march. They were Wayu and very impudent, demanding gun or game medicine to enable them to shoot well. They came into the hut uninvited and would take no denial. It is probable that the Arabs derive a trade in gun medicine. It is inserted in cuts made above the thumb and on the forearm. Their superciliousness shows that they feel themselves to be the dominant race. The Manganja trust to their old bows and arrows. They are much more civil than Ajawa or Wayu. The difference between these two great races is here well worthy of the further notice which Livingstone no doubt would have given it. As a rule, the Manganja are extremely clever in all the savage arts and manufactures. Their looms turn out a strong, serviceable cotton cloth. Their iron weapons and implements show a taste for design which is not reached by the neighboring tribes, and in all matters that relate to husbandry they excel. But in dash and courage they are deficient. The Wayu, on the contrary, have round apple-shaped heads, as distinguished from the long, well-shaped heads of the poor Manganja. They are jocular and merry, given to traveling, and bold in war. These are qualities which serve them well, as they are driven from pillar to post through slave wars and internal dissension, but they have not the brains of the Manganja, nor the talent to make their mark in any direction where brains are wanted. A Manganja man, who formerly presented us with the whole haul of his net, came and gave me 4 fowls. Some really delight in showing kindness. When we came near the bottom of the pass to Piri, Kimsusa's men became loud against his venturing further. He listened, then burst away from them. He listened again, then did the same. And as he had now got men for us, I thought it better to let him go. In 3 hours and a quarter we had made a clear ascent of 2,200 feet above the lake. The first persons we met were 2 men and a boy who were out hunting with a dog and basket trap. This is laid down in the run of some small animal. The dog chases it, and it goes into the basket, which is made of split bamboo, and has prongs looking inwards, which prevents its egress. Mouse traps are made in the same fashion. I suspected that the younger of the men had other game in view, and meant, if fit opportunity offered, to insert an arrow in a Wayu who was taking away his wife as a slave. He told me before we had gained the top of the ascent that some Wayu came to a village separated from his by a small valley, picked a quarrel with the inhabitants, and then went and took the wife and child of a poorer countryman to pay these pretended offenses. 8th October, 1866. At the first village we found that the people up here and those down below were mutually afraid of each other. Kimsusa came to the bottom of the range, his last act being the offer of a pot of beer and a calabash of toku, which latter was accepted. I paid his wives for carrying our things. They had done well, and after we gained the village where we slept, sang and clapped their hands vigorously till 1 o'clock in the morning, when I advised them to go to sleep. The men he at last provided were very faithful and easily satisfied. Here we found the headman Kawa of Mapalapala quite as hospitable. In addition to providing a supper, it is custom to give breakfast before starting. Resting on the 8th to make up for the loss of rest on Sunday, we marched on Tuesday the 9th, but were soon brought to a stand by Gamboa, whose village, Tamamala, stands on another ridge. Gambwa, a laughing, good-natured man, said that he had sent for all his people to see me, and I ought to sleep, to enable them to look on one the like of whom has never come their way before. Intending to go on, I explained some of my objects in coming through the country, advising the people to refrain from selling each other, as it ends in war and depopulation. He was cunning and said, "Well, you must sleep here, and all my people will come and hear those words of peace." I explained that I had employed carriers who expected to be paid, though I had gone but a small part of a day. He replied, "But they will go home and come again tomorrow, and it will count but one day." I thus constrained to remain. 9th October, 1866. Both barometer and boiling point showed an altitude of upwards of 4,000 feet above the sea. This is the hottest month, but the air is delightfully clear and delicious. This country is very fine, lying in long slopes, with mountains rising all around, from 2,000 to 3,000 feet above this upland. They are mostly jagged and rough, not rounded like those near to Matakas. The long slopes are nearly denuded of trees, and the patches of cultivation are so large and often squarish in form, that but little imagination is requisite to transform the whole into the cultivated fields of England. But no hedgerows exist. The trees are in clumps on the tops of the ridges, or at the villages, or at the places of sepulture. Just now the young leaves are out, but are not yet green. In some lights they look brown, but with transmitted light, or when one is near them, crimson prevails. A yellowish green is met sometimes in the young leaves, and brown, pink, and orange red. The soil is rich, but the grass is only excessively rank in spots. In general, it is short. A kind of trenching of the ground is resorted to. They hoe deep and draw it well to themselves. This exposes the other earth to the hoe. The soil is burned too. The grass and weeds are placed in flat heaps, and soil placed over them. The burning is slow, and most of the products of combustion are retained to fatten the field. In this way the people raise large crops. Men and women and children engage in field labor, but at present many of the men are engaged in spinning boughs and cotton. The former is made into a coarse, sacking-looking stuff, immensely strong, which seems to be worn by the women alone. The men are clad in uncomfortable goatskins. No wild animals seem to be in the country, and indeed the population is so large they would have very unsettled times of it. At every turning we meet people or see their villages, all armed with bows and arrows. The bows are unusually long. I measured one made of bamboo, and found that along the bowstring it measured 6 foot 4 inches. Many carry large knives of fine iron, and indeed the metal is abundant. Young men and women wear the hair long. A mass of small ringlets comes down and rests on the shoulders, giving them the appearance of the ancient Egyptians. One side is often cultivated, and the mass hangs jauntily on that side. Some few have a solid cap of it. Not many women wear the lip ring. The example of the Wayu has prevailed so far, but some of the young women have raised lines crossing each other on the arms, which must have cost great pain. They have also small cuts, covering in some cases the whole body. The Moravi or Manganja here may be said to be in their primitive state. We find them very liberal with their food. We give a cloth to the headman of the village where we pass the night, and he gives a goat, or at least cooked fowls and porridge, at night and morning. We were invited by Gambwa in the afternoon to speak the same words to his people that we used to himself in the morning. He nudged a boy to respond, which is considered polite, though he did it only with a rough hem at the end of each sentence. As for our general discourse, we mentioned our relationship to our Father, his love to all his children, the guilt of selling any of his children, the consequence, etc. It begets war, for they don't like to sell their own and steal from other villages who retaliate. Arabs and Wayu, invited into the country by their selling, foster feuds, and war and depopulation ensue. We mentioned the Bible, future state, prayer, advise union, that they should unite as one family to expel enemies, who came first as slave traders and ended by leaving the country a wilderness. In reference to union, we showed that they ought to have seen justice done to the man who lost his wife and child at their very doors, but this want of cohesion is the bane of the Manganja. If the evil does not affect themselves, they don't care whom it injures, and Gambwa confirmed this by saying that when he routed Kamburi's people, the villagers west of him fled instead of coming to his aid. We hear that many of the Manganja up here are fugitives from Nyassa. 10th October, 1866. Kawa and his people were with us early this morning, and we started from Tamayala with them. The weather is lovely, and the scenery, though at present tinged with yellow from the grass, might be called glorious. The bright sun and delicious air are quite exhilarating. We passed a fine flowing rivulet called Levezee, going into the lake, and many smaller runnels of delicious cold water. On resting by a dark sepulchral grove, a tree attracted the attention, as nowhere else seen. It is called Bankoto, and said to bear eatable fruit. Many fine flowers were just bursting into full blossom. After about 4 hours' march, we put up at Chitimba, the village of Kanyigomba, and were introduced by Kawa, who came all the way for the purpose. 11th October, 1866. A very cold morning, with a great bank of black clouds in the east, whence the wind came. Therm, 59 degrees. In hut, 69 degrees. The huts are built very well. The roof, with the lower part plastered, is formed so as not to admit a ray of light, and the only visible mode of ingress for it is by the door. This case shows that winter is cold. On proposing to start, breakfast was not ready. Then a plan was formed to keep me another day at a village close by belonging to one Kulu, a man of Kauma, to whom we go next. It was effectual, and here we are detained another day. A curiously cut out stool is in my hut, made by the Mekwisa, who are southwest of this. It is of 1 block, but hollowed out, and all the spaces indicated are hollow too, about 2.5 feet long by 1.5 foot high. 12th October, 1866. We marched westerly with a good deal of southing. Kulu gave us a goat and cooked liberally for us all. He set off with us as if to go to Kauma's in our company, but after we had gone a couple miles, he slipped behind and ran away. Some are naturally mean, and some naturally noble. The mean cannot help showing their nature, nor can the noble. But the noble-hearted must enjoy life most. Kulu got a cloth, and he gave us at least its value, but he thought he had got more than he gave, and so by running away that he had done us nicely, without troubling himself to go and introduce us to Kauma. I usually request a headman of a village to go with us. They give a good report of us, if for no other reason than for their own credit, because no one likes to be thought giving his countenance to people other than respectable, and it costs little. We come close to the foot of several squarish mountains having perpendicular sides. One, called Ulazo Pamalungo, is used by the people, whose villages cluster round its base as a storehouse for grain. Large granaries stand on its top, containing food to be used in case of war. A large cow is kept up there, which is supposed capable of knowing and letting the owners know when war is coming. There is a path up, but it was not visible to us. The people are all Kanthunda, or climbers, not Maravi. Kimsusa said that he was the only Maravi chief, but this I took to be an ebullition of beer bragging. The natives up here, however, confirm this and assert that they are not Maravi, who are known by having markings down the side of the face. We spent at night at Kanthunda village on the western side of a mountain called Punzi, the H being an aspirate only. Many villages are planted round its base, but in front, that is westwards, we have plains, and there the villages are as numerous. Mostly they are within 1/2 mile of each other, and few are a mile from other hamlets. Each village has a clump of trees around it. This is partly for shade, partly for privacy, from motives of decency. The heat of the sun causes the effluvia to exhale quickly, so they are seldom offensive. The rest of the country, where not cultivated, is covered with grass, the seed stalks about knee-deep. It is gently undulating, lying in low waves stretching northeast and southwest. The space between each wave is usually occupied by a boggy spot or water course, which in some cases is filled with pools with trickling rills between. All people are engaged at present in making mounds 6 or 8 feet square and from 2 to 3 feet high. The sods in places not before hoed are separated from the soil beneath and collected into flattened heaps, the grass undermost. When dried, fire is applied and slow combustion goes on, most of the products of the burning being retained in the ground. Much of the soil is incinerated. The final preparation is effected by the men digging up the subsoil round the mound, passing each hoeful into the left hand, where it pulverizes and is then thrown on to the heap. It is thus virgin soil on the top of the ashes and burned ground of the original heap, very clear of weeds. At present, many mounds have beans and maize about 4 inches high. Holes, a foot in diameter and a few inches deep, are made irregularly over the surface of the mound, and about 8 or 10 grains put into each. These are watered by hand and calabash, and kept growing till the rains set in, when a very early crop is secured. 13th October, 1866. After leaving Punzé, we crossed the Livingstone, a rivulet which flows northward, and then into Lake Nyassa. The lines of the gentle undulation tend in that direction. Some hills appear on the plains, but after the mountains which we have left behind, they are mere mounds. We are over 3,000 feet above the sea, and the air is delicious, but we often pass spots covered with a plant which grows in marshy places, and its heavy smell always puts me in mind that at other seasons this may not be so pleasant a residence. The fact of even maize being planted on mounds where the ground is naturally quite dry tells a tale of abundant humidity of climate. Kauma, a fine tall man with bald head and pleasant manners, told us that some of his people had lately returned from the Chibisa or Babisa country, whither they had gone to buy ivory, and they would give me information about the path. He took a fancy to one of the boys' blankets, offering a native cloth, much larger in exchange, and even a sheep to boot. But the owner being unwilling to part with his covering, Kauma told me that he had not sent for his Babisa travelers on account of my boy refusing to deal with him. A little childish this, but otherwise he was very hospitable. He gave me a fine goat, which unfortunately my people left behind. The chief said that no Arabs ever came his way, nor Portuguese native traders. When advising them to avoid the first attempts to begin the slave trade, as it would inevitably lead to war and depopulation, Kauma replied that the chiefs had resolved to unite against the Wayu of Mapande should he come again on a foray up to the highlands. But they are like a rope of sand, there is no cohesion among them, and each village is nearly independent of every other. They mutually distrust each other. 14th October, 1866. Spent Sunday here. Kauma says that his people are partly Kathunda and partly Chipeta. The first are the mountaineers, the second dwellers on the plains. The Chipeta have many lines of marking. They are all only divisions of the great Manganja tribe, and their dialects differ very slightly from that spoken by the same people on the Shirai. The population is very great and very ceremonious. When we meet anyone, he turns aside and sits down. We clap the hand on the chest and say, Re peta, Re peta. That is, we pass, or let us pass. This is responded to at once by a clapping of the hands together. When a person is called at a distance, he gives 2 loud claps of assent, or if he rises from a near superior, he does the same thing, which is a sort of leave-taking. We have to ask who are the principal chiefs in the direction which we wish to take, and decide accordingly. Zombo was pointed out as a chief on a range of hills on our west. Beyond him lies Undi Msenga. I had to take this route, as my people have a very vivid idea of the danger of going northwards towards the Mazitu. We made more southing than we wished. One day, beyond Zomba and west-southwest, is the part called Chindando, where the Portuguese formerly went for gold. They don't seem to have felt it worthwhile to come here, as neither ivory nor gold could be obtained if they did. The country is too full of people to allow any wild animals elbow room. Even the smaller animals are hunted down by means of nets and dogs. We rested at Pachoma, the headman offering a goat and beer, but I declined, and went on to Malomba. Here Kauma's carriers turned, because a woman had died that morning as we left the village. They asserted that had she died before we started, not a man would have left. This shows a reverence for death, for the woman was no relative of any of them. The headman of Malomba was very poor but very liberal, cooking for us and presenting a goat. Another headman from a neighboring village, a laughing, good-natured old man named Chakala, brought beer and a fowl in the morning. I asked him to go on with us to Moronga, it being important, as above mentioned, to have the like of his kind in our company, and he consented. We saw Mount Ngala in the distance, like a large sugar loaf shot up in the air. In our former route to Kasungu, we passed north of it. 16th October, 1866. crossed the rivulet Chaikuyo going north for the lake, and Moronga being but 1.5 hours off, we went on to Chipanga. This is the proper name of what on the Zambezi is corrupted into Chipanga. The headsman, a miserable hemp-consuming leper, fled from us. We were offered a miserable hut, which we refused. Chakala, meanwhile, went through the whole village seeking a better, which we ultimately found. It was not in this chief to be generous, though Chakala did what he could in trying to indoctrinate him. When I gave him a present, he immediately proposed to sell a goat. We got on pretty well, however. Zomha is in a range of hills to our west called Zala Nyama. The Portuguese, in going to Kasembe, went still further west than this. Passing on, we came to a smithy and watched the founder at work drawing off slag from the bottom of his furnace. He broke through the hardened slag by striking it with an iron instrument inserted in the end of a pole, when the material flowed out of the small hole left for the purpose in the bottom of the furnace. The ore, probably the black oxide, was like sand, and was put in at the top of the furnace mixed with charcoal. Only one bellows was at work, formed out of a goat skin, and the blast was very poor. Many of these furnaces, or the remains, are met with on knolls. Those at work have a peculiarly tall hut built over them. On the eastern edge of a valley lying north and south, with the Diampe stream flowing along it, and the Dzala Nyama range on the western side, are 2 villages screened by fine specimens of the Ficus indica. One of these is owned by the headman Teresa, and there we spent the night. We made very short marches, for the sun is very powerful, and the soil, baked hard, is sore on the feet. No want of water, however, is felt, for we come to supplies every mile or 2. The people look very poor, having few or no beads, the ornaments being lines and cuttings on the skin. They trust more to boise than cotton. I noticed but 2 cotton patches. The women are decidedly plain, but monopolize all the boise cloth. Teresa was excessively liberal, and having informed us that Zomba lived some distance up the range, and was not the principal man in these parts, we, to avoid climbing the hills, turned away to the north, in the direction of the paramount chief, Chisumpi, whom we found to be only traditionally great. 20th October, 1866. In passing along, we came to a village embowered in fine trees. The headman is Kaveta, a really fine specimen of the Canthuda, tall, well-made, with a fine forehead and Assyrian nose. He proposed to us to remain overnight with him, and I unluckily declined. Convoying us out a mile, we parted with this gentleman, and then came to a smith's village, where the same invitation was given and refused. A sort of infatuation drove us on, and after a long, hot march, we found the great Chinsumpi, the facsimile in black of Sir Colin Campbell. His nose, mouth, and the numerous wrinkles on his face were identical with those of the great general, but here all resemblance ceased. 2 men had proceeded to give us information, and when I followed, I saw that his village was one of squalid misery, the only fine things about being the lofty trees in which it lay. Chisumpi begged me to sleep at a village about half a mile behind. His son was browbeating him on some domestic affair, and the older man implored me to go. Next morning he came early to that village and arranged for our departure, offering nothing and apparently not wishing to see us at all. I suspect that though paramount chief, he is weak-minded and has thereby lost all his influence, but in the people's eyes he is still a great one. Several of my men exhibiting symptoms of distress, I inquired for a village in which we could rest Saturday and Sunday, and at a distance from Chisumpi. A headman volunteered to lead us to one west of this. In passing the sepulchral grove of Chisumpi, our guide remarked, "Chisumpi's forefathers sleep there." This was the first time I have heard the word sleep applied to death in these parts. The trees in these groves and around many of the villages are very large, and show what the country would become if depopulated. We crossed the Diampwe or Adiampwe from 5 to 15 yards wide, and well supplied with water even now. It rises near the Nadomo Mountains and flows northwards towards the Lintepe and lake. We found Chitakola's village called Paratala, a pleasant one on the east side of the Adampwe Valley. Many elephants and other animals feed in the valley, and we saw the Bechuana Hopo again after many years. The umbare, otherwise nyumbo plant, has a pea-shaped or rather papilionaceous flower with a fine scent. It seems to grow quite wild. Its flowers are yellow. Chaula is the only poison used by the Moravi for their arrows. It is said to cause mortification. One of the wonders usually told of us in this upland region is that we sleep without fire. The boys' blankets suffice for warmth during the night when the thermometer sinks to 64 degrees to 60 degrees, but no one else has covering sufficient. Some huts in process of building here show that a thick coating of plaster is put on outside the roof before the grass thatch is applied. Not a chink is left for the admission of air. Ohitikola was absent from Paritala when we arrived on some Malando or other. These Malandos are the business of their lives. They are like petty lawsuits. If one trespasses on his neighbor's rights in any way, it is a Malando, and the headmen of all the villages are called on to settle it. Women are a fruitful source of Malando. A few ears of Indian corn had been taken by a person, and Chitikola had been called a full day's journey off to settle this Malando. He administered Mauve, and the person vomited. Therefore, innocence was clearly established. He came in the evening of the 21st, footsore and tired, and at once gave us some beer. This perpetual reference to food and drink is natural inasmuch as it is the most important point in our intercourse. While the chief was absent, we got nothing. The queen even begged a little meat for his child, who was recovering from an attack of smallpox. There being no shops, we had to sit still without food. I took observations for longitude and whiled away the time by calculating the lunars. Next day, the chief gave us a goat cooked whole and plenty of porridge. I noticed that he too had the Assyrian type of face. End of chapter 5.